The Educator Effectiveness Committee is called to order. May I have a roll call?
Miss Beebe? Here. Miss Beebe is present. Miss Bofi? Miss Bofi is present. Miss Bradford? Miss Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey is not in attendance. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Hill? Ms. Hill is not in attendance. Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Dr. Moranti? Present. Dr. Moranti is present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Romer? Mr. Romer is not in attendance. And then our teacher representative, Ms. Lakeisha McKinney? Present. Ms. McKinney is present.
Okay, great. But just a quick announcement again before we get started, especially for anyone who's joined us in the past several minutes. We have a overflow room set up in the Thomas Jefferson room, live streaming of the meeting happening, as I understand it now, until the end of the meeting, just in case anyone is interested and if there aren't enough chairs in here. We have a point of personal privilege. Dr. Moranti, would you like to?
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I would like to recognize the deans and chairs of education that are with us this afternoon in attendance. Linda McKee, who is the president of LACTE, Dr. Vicki Gentry from Northwestern, Dr. Jane Chauvin from Loyola, and Dr. Darryl Kruger from New Orleans, UNO. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Okay, great. First item.
On page 1, item 2.1, consideration of a report on the teacher exit interview system. The recommendation is to receive the report. The consent agenda is ready for approval. Adding item 7.1.
May I have a motion? Yeah. Motion.
So moved.
We have a second? Is there any discussion on this item?
Which item is it on consent agenda?
The consent agenda.
Madam Chairman, if I might introduce this just for context to the board. Every year the department is required to work with school systems on conducting exit interviews. This year we made changes to the process that clarified the instructions for administrators in the school system, and thus we ensured that every teacher who left the system got an interview. In past years, it's been really roughly only half at the most of teachers who actually exited got an interview. Of 6,083 teachers that were included in the report by districts, 94 indicated that they were leaving because of dissatisfaction. The majority were either retiring or transferring or leaving because of personal reasons. We do see that retirement is up by 0.8% over the year before from a percentage perspective. Transferring is up by 5%, and personal reasons are down. Overall, the number of teachers leaving the system has held relatively constant this year to the last year to the year prior to that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Is there any discussion?
Yes.
Yes,
Madam
Dr.
Chairman.
Beebe.
I just want in receiving this information, Superintendent White, do we have a count of those teachers who took early retirement, thus leaving money on the table regarding their retirement pension? Is that broken up to that extent?
This survey is not broken up in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I think there's a point of clarification.
Yeah, so we just need an approval for the consent agenda. We actually, wouldn't have to discuss the 2.1 and 3.1 as well as 7.1. So we just need a motion and a second for the consent agenda.
Okay. So Ms. Bradford
moved.
makes the motion, and the second is by Mr. Gale.
Okay. And then
Okay.
I'll-
Okay, so we're moving on. Next item.
On page 13, item 4.1, consideration of reinstatement of Loyola University's secondary education undergraduate degree programs. The recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
Okay, Dr. Moranti's motion. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Garvey. Is there any discussion on this item? Having none, the motion carries. Next. Oh, there's one card. We have one public comment. Ms. Okay, so there's none. Okay, having none, the motion carries. Next item.
Page 17, item 4.2, consideration of a request to delay the NCATE accreditation visit of the University of New Orleans.
Is there a motion?
The recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Bofi, second by Walter. Mr. Lee. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, having none, the motion carries. Next item.
Page 23, item 4.3, consideration of I Teach Louisiana's Educational Leader Practitioner Program, alternate path to Educational Leader certification. The recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
Okay. Motion, do I have a second? Second by Mr. Gio. Is there any discussion on this topic? Having none, the motion carries. Next item.
Page 24, item 5.1, consideration of the formation of a committee comprised of statisticians and mathematicians to research the reliability and validity of the Compass value-added model. The recommendation is to receive.
Okay. Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item?
Yes. Thank
Dr.
you.
Beebe.
I put this on the agenda because as a former personnel director and a district superintendent, and certainly as a BESE member, I have received correspondence from teachers throughout the state regarding the value-added model. And I do recognize that approximately 33% of our teachers are held to more rigorous standards than the 67% who write as student learning targets. And it's not my objective to pit teachers against teachers, because I love educators. I certainly appreciate the fact that they face challenges on a daily basis, and I appreciate the services they provide to students. My objective is to appeal to this board, my colleagues, to have them further examine the value-added model. Superintendent White, in a most recent meeting with superintendents, the Superintendent's Advisory Committee, he indicated that it is likely our student experience will be that of failure. And in fact, Ms. Hill and I attended a conference in Washington, D.C. in April, I think it was April 2012, whereby there was a representative from the National Governors Association, and he indicated that any state, well, in fact, he stated that no state should implement a 50% value-added model, particularly with the rollout of PARC, because there would likely be an increase in teacher ineffectiveness and a decline in student achievement. So there is a prediction for failure within Louisiana. And my concern, again, is related to the inequities. 10% of our teachers could likely lose their certification, their license to teach, due to ineffective ratings. We recognize the rigor, and I just think it's a travesty to hold a certain group of teachers to the value-added model. Their livelihood is impacted. And I will say to you in the audience, I have been in education 29 years, and I have seen just recently the fact that educators, whether they're superintendents, whether they're classroom teachers, principals, they're working extremely hard to be compliant with our education reform initiatives. And these individuals who are, I mean, even spouses are picking up the slack at home, making sure their children are attended to, that, you know, making sure the homes are clean and so forth, so they could allow for teachers to do what is necessary in teacher preparation, lesson preparation. But again, once we look at our teacher value model here in Louisiana, we see that, researchers have indicated their concerns with the lack of reliability. In fact, I have a colleague, Dr. Mercedes Snyder, who, in fact, she submitted a report to me whereby she has outlined her concerns and the concerns relating to VAM. I have spoken to other mathematicians. Herb Bassett, in fact, is one who was very diligent, attended the legislative session speaking to the concerns of Compass and value added. And I know the mindset is within those 67% possibly that, well, it doesn't impact me, so I'm not going to get involved. But again, you know, when we look at the core areas, those teachers, the 33%, they are in the core academic areas, and yes, in many instances, they are rewarded by school systems for their effective performance. But I've always been for the underdog, ladies and gentlemen, and those who are, you know, when there is inequity, I'm going to raise question to that inequity. And so again, if you look, ladies and gentlemen, on page 25, where Dr. Snyder's, she points out throughout her paper that there were questions regarding the methodology used, and that in fact the hierarchical linear modeling is not suited for isolating the contribution of individual teachers towards student progress. This should have been recognized by the researchers. A data management rigor and randomized selection, the assignments were not met. The study replication was not offered. The results are weak and provide no solid basis for teacher retention decisions. And these issues must be addressed when study results will be used for high-stakes decision-making. And again, I would appeal to those who have come today to speak to this issue, those who are more in line with the statistical knowledge. I know Dr. Snyder is a statistician. She has a doctorate in statistics. And again, she, throughout her report, she raises great concern. So I am putting this on the table for further discussion, and I will be prepared to offer a substitute motion when we hear all of the concerns noted.
Okay, thank you. We do have some public comment before then, Superintendent.
Sure. First of all, I want to say that though I think some of the facts are wrong in what Dr. Beebe just said, the general essence of it I agree with. And members, she raised a lot of points in that, so I want to try to distill what it is that I particularly agree with, so you have a sense of our consensus. Number one, I do agree that an analysis of the value-added model is a good thing. I have some concerns about task forces and more committees and such things, but I think there's nothing wrong with an additional analysis. Second, and probably even more important, I think that Dr. Beebe's points around the challenges in this transition that our teachers have taken on is a good one. And as you know, we're in the middle of a transition plan, and the board is going to be considering in 2 months' time that transition plan, that transition policy. Now, in Dr. Beebe's statements, she did get wrong what I said about at the outset of that transition policy. In fact, I said that we were going to essentially try to hold test scores in Louisiana constant. Unlike whatever you heard at that convention in D.C., there won't be a big drop-off. I'm happy to talk that through. But I don't think that changes the core of what Dr. Beebe said, which is about the position of the educator. And if I'm an educator, and the standards are changing, then at the same time you're tying statistical evidence to my evaluation, it sure would be good to have a little bit of time to learn these new standards, rather than just saying, well, we assume you know where you're going, so please hit the mark. You know, we're all in a learning process about the Common Core State Standards. So what I would suggest to the board as you consider what Dr. Beebe has said is, one, I endorse the idea that a study is always a good thing. I don't think we need another commission, but I take the suggestion a study is always a good thing. Secondly, you will be hearing policy in December that I believe will speak to a lot of Dr. Beebe's concerns about the role of the teacher, about the accountability of educators, and about the pressures that they're under. And I agree with your sentiment, Dr. Beebe, around trying to take some of that pressure off of our educators. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful, okay. Public,
Mr. Chairman?
oh, yeah.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
For some clarification, I wanted to see if I understood the superintendent correctly. Did you say that under the new testing system, the average student score is going to be roughly the same as it was under the old system?
Yes, and the reason is that
Unlike what happened in New York where grades dropped dramatically?
Correct.
Okay.
And the reason is that this is getting somewhat onto a future topic, but the tests are graded on a 5-point scale in Louisiana. The National Assessment of Education Progress, the NAEP, is also graded on a 5-point scale. And any test that we are going to be taking in years hence, after the LEAP, will also be graded on a 5-point scale, and it will be designed to have the same distribution of scores as the NAEP. The LEAP is designed to have the same distribution of scores as the NAEP. New tests will be designed to have the same distribution of scores. Now, that means that right now on the NAEP, about 70% of our kids in Louisiana are at basic or above. While on the LEAP, about 70% of our kids are at basic or above. Because the new tests will be made to mirror those tests, you can expect 70% of our kids to be at basic or above on the new tests. Now, that doesn't mean I don't disagree. Doesn't mean I disagree with Dr. Beebe. I also agree that we should provide a kind of cushion, guardrails, whatever you want to call it, in this transition time. And you will be receiving in December policy regarding letter grades, regarding educator evaluation, to try to, I think, achieve what Dr. Beebe is suggesting, which is let's take some of that pressure off. Let's not assume we know everything about what's going to happen next, and let's allow this transition to proceed in a way that gives educators a little bit of a release.
Okay, if I could, just to double check, make sure I'm understanding you right. I've heard a lot of teachers say that they're nervous about the new test and are afraid that their value-added measurements are likely to drop dramatically because of the change to the new test. And you're saying, if I hear you right, that worry would be misplaced.
I'm saying two things, if I might. One, the worry is, it's not statistically true. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I wouldn't be worried as a person, as a teacher. And we
worried because of the test, the change in test.
There's no statistical change likely to happen. And second, I think we should try to work with teachers on that question of worry and take some of that pressure off.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Bowman.
Superintendent White, given the climate for teachers in a transition like this, I respect that, we'll make policy in December and talk about it, but I mean, teachers are doing the implementation now. And so because we have a system that so much depends on the evaluation, I know that that's what a lot of teachers are thinking about. So I appreciate, that we'll make a decision in December, but I don't think I don't know how to, I wish you would leak information, or are you telling us that we're going to?
We're working through a public process.
Okay, you're going to go through a public process.
We've already started that public discussion. We started at the Accountability Commission. We started at the Superintendent's Advisory Council, and we're working it through with district leaders and charter leaders across the state. When we have a package of policies that's going to be our final proposal to the board, we'll announce that publicly. That will be well in advance of December.
Okay.
I don't think we're there yet on all of the policies, but we will announce it soon, and I agree with you, it should be announced soon.
And I guess I respect the way that, there's district leaders and we have councils for different people to voice their opinion, but I would think that this day and age that it would also be easy for a teacher to send an email, like that you could open up an email account where teachers could send in their suggestions. I mean, they're the ones in the classroom who are doing the work and thinking about what this transition means, not just for them, but also for their students. And so I'd like to hear what the person in the classroom, so not someone representing a group or representing a system, but what people in the classroom need in order to make this transition more manageable, but then at the same time, they may, every time I asked my students, they were harder on themselves than I was on them. But I think we have to start asking those questions. So if you can think of a way to get that interaction from people who are actually doing the work, it would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. And so you have this. I know you're not immediately looking for a response, but we're doing a statewide tour. On every stop, we do a teacher meeting. We also receive literally dozens of emails a week, both to me directly as well as through our compass@la.gov address. And so we're working these issues through.
So I would not suggest that 50,000 teachers email you, but I would suggest that people who have suggestions would send it to compass@la.gov, and then those who have a message for you, of course, would do that. I appreciate that you interact with people so much and that you have your information available, but I also think that some people may be just as happy to send it to the compass@la.gov if that's the appropriate way to handle it.
Agreed. Yes.
Okay, we're going to get started with public comment. Dr. Michael Walker-Jones, if you might be able to come up to speak, and James Madden, if you can sit in waiting. You'll have 2 minutes, and we're going to go ahead and keep the timer now.
Well, I'm gonna do like my colleagues and claim our 5 for the Louisiana Association of
Yes.
Educators. Okay.
5
so
minutes.
thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
First, let me start with. First, let me start in reverse. I agree with Board Member Holly Bofi. Thank you. That we need to have some information from teachers directly, but we don't need anecdotal information. And I know that in the last legislative session there was at least a resolution passed that asked this Department of Education to use what's been called Tells Louisiana, or at least that's what we're naming it, similar to other states, in order to gather that information in a statistical, reliable fashion from teachers across the state. And yet we're not going down that path. We're relying upon anecdotal information, albeit it may be good for us to go out and talk to teachers about their day-to-day life, but I think it's important for us to make sure that we do it in a way as well that has rigor, that has some structure and reliability to it, in a survey similar to North Carolina, Kentucky, Massachusetts, California, Mississippi, where they sent out this survey of all teachers trying to get back this information of what is it that you're experiencing in the classroom? What is it that you need? I'm a little concerned that what we are doing when it comes to teachers is that we're putting them off to the side and we're playing lip service to them, and we're not being real serious when it comes to really getting their input. The other thing, too, that I'd like to suggest is that this particular study with regard to how we look at our VAM is absolutely critical, because there is no correlation as yet between LEAP, iLEAP, and PARC. First off, LEAP and iLEAP is not when it comes to teacher performance, it is not a growth model, it's a predictive model. Am I correct on that? What we're trying to do is predict the scores of students based upon past history, which means that before we get to the predictability of the scores, we've got to have a baseline. This is according to Dr. Noel's research himself. I happen to also have a doctoral degree in terms of testing and measurement. Dr. Noel and I have conversed on this many times, and he says at least a minimum of a year's worth of data before you can get to the predictability stage, and I would say that at least a minimum of 2 years of data. We're also having teachers who are suffering the consequences now of high-stakes decision based upon something that, as Dr. Mercedes Snyder said, is absolutely at its core, has a large volume of instability to it, or instability to it. So I would suggest that not only if it's not a matter of this particular vehicle, but I would respectfully say to this board that we do need to have some kind of data from the teachers, reliable data in a survey. And second, we do need to have some kind of methodology to review VAM and how it's going to relate to PARC and then also to do the assessment with Park in terms of if we're going to use it for students in terms of trying to predict scores in order to come back to VAM, that work has got to be done and it's got to be started at some point. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. James Madden. James Madden, and then Wayne Free is next. 2 minutes.
Okay. I'm James Madden, professor of mathematics at LSU and co-director of the Kane Center for STEM Literacy, director of the Louisiana Math and Science Teacher Institute, a graduate degree program in the College of Science for secondary STEM teachers. I'm also a member of the board of the charter school corporation, CSAL Incorporated. As a mathematician, I feel it is my responsibility to speak out about policies that claim legitimacy partly on the basis of their mathematical foundations. I would like to present a list of points concerning value-added modeling that should not be controversial and which I hope you will continue to attend to. First, error rates should be calculated and reported. Second, transparency and accountability with regard to methodology should be improved. And last, assuring that VAM is useful in developing human resources should be a priority. Let me elaborate about these points. With regard to random error, any statistical procedure has an error rate that can be determined with much more certainty than any particular judgment concerning any particular individual. Indeed, if the error rates cannot be computed with confidence, it is a sign of weakness in the methodology. Statisticians know that specific errors of specific kinds will be made at predictable rates and can compute the rates. Error rates for the VAM model should be known by anyone using its results. There are also systematic errors involved, and the systematic errors are often more difficult to predict, but they should at least be investigated and reported. With regard to transparency and accountability, I would urge you to improve the public documentation. The system that the state presently is using has gone through a long development and a series of modifications, but documentation of the state's VAM methodology is sketchy, incomplete, and difficult to locate. And speaking from my own experience, opaque at a technical level. We need clear, technically complete accounts of how the VAM scores are computed.
Thank you.
This is my time?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wayne Free. Okay. Stephen Moynihan. Sorry.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Steve Monahan, but I answer to many other names. Some of them aren't probably so nice sometimes. I don't always answer, but I do recognize that I'm referred to by more than Monahan. That being said, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board, and I think I could be brief. I think the item before us is 5.1. And the issue is whether or not we should have a statistical analysis of the value-added model. And I think I understood the superintendent to indicate that while he might have a problem with the details of whether it's a commission, a committee, a task force, or what have you, that it should be done. I don't think, as not being the son of or a child of a farmer, I don't have a lot of experience with things like cows getting out in the field and then closing the door and all that stuff. But some of you all may understand those metaphors better than I do. But essentially, I think we are in a real serious problem with the product. I think when I go back in memory to 2009 and sitting at the table with Dr. Noel in regard to what was referred to as an organic experience, that we would see if it worked. If it worked, we would expand. If it didn't, we would be honest about it and realize that it wasn't ready for prime time. That was the discussion during the race to whatever. When we went legislatively with this, and I'm not blaming this board, I'm simply blaming the powers, that whoever they were, to make a decision that we were going to codify inside of statute in Act 54 the inclusion of something that everyone knew had not been field tested, had not developed the credibility and reliability or the integrity that we expected or hoped And so the product, unfortunately, damaged itself. And now what we have is a reliability issue. We have a problem that's beyond the scope of the mathematicians to fix. It's a political problem. So I think it's excellent that the superintendent will be speaking with real teachers. But if I can close with just one thought, the conversation began at the wrong place. It was validated that we needed evaluation changes, or the argument was presented because we didn't have a bountiful harvest of terminations. No evaluation system should be termed successful or unsuccessful because of the number of people that are found to be fireable. And that's what drove much of the discussion in the political halls. But that conversation has to change. The termination index doesn't validate the evaluation one way or the other, no matter what we do in this room. There are problems with whether or not this is a real system. There are suspicions that the system has been changed, or the formula. I am no psychometrician. I have no idea. It's long overdue. It is way long overdue. And the confidence factor is very low. Only 30% of your population experience the effect of VAM one way or the other. So the fact that we are telling the public that there is a quantitative and qualitative evaluation that equals a total summative finding is essentially a lie. We have a quantitative for 30% of a population that may or may not be reliable, and we have a qualitative and a qualitative for the other 70%. And if that can't be fixed, if we can't as people fix that, then regardless of, and I want to be positive with the recommendation because we do support it, but I don't think we're finding our way out of the weeds as long as there is that basic untruth about the process. So thank you very much. We support and we thank Dr. Beebe, and I do appreciate the superintendent. From what I believe, I heard him say that it's time for the study of the formula itself. But it is a complicated situation we find ourselves right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie Thibodeau, and after that is Lee Barrios.
Good afternoon. I probably could talk on this for hours. I am not a mathematician. I am not a statistician. I'm a practicing educator and have been for 31 years. I presented before the House of Representatives and the Senate 18 months ago with the exact same data, predicting that we would be in this situation for many educators. I have debated the formula, and my greatest concern is that we are holding only 1/3 of the population of educators to a very difficult standard, and telling this population that we are going to take their teaching certificate based on a value-added model that exactly what you heard earlier is based on a predicted score that a child has to beat. Many of you I know are parents. I'm a parent of 4 children. None of my 4 children score the same in school. None of my 4 children even have the attitude toward education. And not to pick on males, but I'm going to pick on my own 2 boys. I teach in a small school district. My kids went to a high-performing school, an A+ school, a school with 92% of the kids scoring at basic and above, and 1/3 of that population scoring at advanced and mastery. So I'm talking from a school that has high expectations for their students. However, I would feel really upset if my oldest son, and I'll call him Seth, was in a teacher's class, and my second son, Gavin, in that same class. For those of you who go to a small community school, your kids tend to have the same teacher, right? Pretty much 3 of the 4 kids had the same teacher in first, same teacher in second, same teacher in third, same teacher in fourth. Here's my concern. That same effective teacher would have got an effective rating on this VAM model on my second son, Gavin, because he's a worker.
Thank you.
Can I say one more thing? Based on the way his VAM prediction, it's based on a norm group. Both of my sons would have fit in the same norm group. However, one would have worked for it and met that benchmark, but that same teacher would have got an ineffective on him, my oldest son, because he's not going to work toward that VAM. So I really think there's some flaws in the way that predicted VAM score and holding our kids accountable to a benchmark.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lee Barrios, for those that don't know me, I'm a retired teacher from St. Tammany with a master's degree and national board certification. I usually represent myself, and I may have put that on the card, but for this particular issue, I'm representing the majority of teachers in St. Tammany Parish who obviously could not be here today. I'm only going to hit on one problem part of the VAM. There are many, and this I'm taking directly from the U.S. Department of Ed website, and it's based on the National Research Council's Board on Testing and Assessment. A few excerpts. The Title I statute explicitly requires that assessments be valid and reliable for their intended purpose and be consistent with relevant nationally recognized technical and professional standards. Educational institutions should have information indicating an alignment among the curriculum, instruction, and material covered on such a test used for high-stakes purposes. Upcoming tests cannot be valid due to alignment with curriculum. A huge error made by promoters of Common Core is the attempt to connect the resulting test without first guaranteeing alignment to a curriculum. Their need to make it appear that local districts wrote the curriculum makes it impossible to create one valid test for high-stakes purposes. No single national test can be appropriately aligned to every individual district curriculum. How can this be possible this year when there's no measure of accountability for alignment because districts have individually been tasked with an alignment with little time and no appropriate resources? If an assessment yields low scores because there's a major gap between the skills and knowledge being assessed and what is being taught, this does not undermine the validity of the assessment for purposes of program evaluation accountability. Indeed, the purpose of the assessment may be to detect such gaps. In contrast, the existence of such a gap may raise serious concerns about the appropriateness of the use of the assessment for promotion and graduation decisions. The National Research Council Board on Testing Assessment said no single test score can be considered a definitive measure of a student's knowledge. Ipso facto, no teacher can be held accountable for those same standardized test scores.
Thank you.
I thought I would give 5 minutes because I'm representing a group. St. Tammany teachers.
Okay.
I just have 1 more minute. Okay. To say that there are other measures used in addition to the student test scores is meaningless when the law states that, in fact, if a teacher scores low enough on the VAM portion of the metric, she's deemed ineffective regardless of the observation component. Then there's one more case of disparate impact, and this is from the U.S. Department of Ed website. The federal non-discrimination regulations also provide that a recipient of federal funds may not utilize criteria or methods of administration which have the effect of subjecting individuals to discrimination. In the absence of effective services for low-performing students, Superintendent White, better tests will not lead to better educational outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. James Finney and Coach Frank Buckley is after James.
If I'm representing me, myself, and I, do I get 5 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 will be fine. For purposes of this comment, I'm Dr. James Spinney. I have a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Science, both in mathematics and a PhD in engineering science. I like doing number crunching on huge data sets, and so I've been eagerly awaiting the details of how we can reproduce these value-added numbers. I've been waiting for that for about 2 years. I've been actively pursuing specific details since April, have yet to receive them. I was promised a briefing 2 months ago and was not able to get a call returned by Mr. White's office to set that up. Professor Madden did a very good job of capturing the primary issues with using this model, and so I'll try not to repeat what he said. I have concerns about the model and its unknown and unintended consequences. And I'm particularly concerned about the inability to get enough details to be able to reproduce any individual teacher's numbers. And so I support formation of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Coach Frank. I am an 18-year teacher, mathematics. Last year in October, I walked into a classroom as a substitute for an 8th grade class because 4 teachers had walked out. I remained there for the remainder of the year. I was graded ineffective. I couldn't understand why. The reason I say I didn't understand why, because I had an algebra class where 100% of my students passed the EOC in the leap. In my 2 regular classes, 80% of my students passed the leap. On the other hand, my inclusion class, only, let's say 75% of those kids failed. But my inclusion teacher was not in the classroom 90% of the time. So I spent a lot of time with those 2 classes managing it. Because I did a good job, the principal decided to have me to come back this year. This year I'm teaching 6th grade. Already in the 8th week of school, I have realized that we have some issues. I have a group of 4th grade students that have never passed the LEAP test. They have been taken out of 4th grade and placed into 6th grade. We have raised the 6th grade standards. What I taught 8th grade last year, I'm teaching 6th grade this year. So the only way those kids are going to pass the test is that I cheat. And I'm not going to cheat, I teach. Now, it seems as though we get into the point where you're trying to force teachers to cheat, and I'll talk more about that later. But those teachers that are cheating, and we talked about this before, they're getting good scores. They're getting good, they're effective teachers, but you're cheating. I never understood how can you be an effective teacher that cheat. I never understood how a superintendent could tell you he's not going to investigate that cheating is going on. That's my problem with it. I'm in education to educate children, not to play this testing game. We need to teach them, not cheat.
Thank you. This concludes public comment for this item. Can we restate the motion?
The motion is to receive the report on the formation of a committee of statisticians and mathematicians to research the reliability and validity of the Compass value-added model. A motion of Ms. Beebe, seconded by Ms. Hill.
Okay, is there any more board discussion on this item? Dr. Beebe.
Okay, I also want to point out that, need to ask Superintendent White. I'm sure that we've spent, just a comment, we've spent millions of dollars on Compass, the development of Compass. And in fact, when we first introduced Compass, and I was not opposed to the evaluation process, but the fact is that the governor, and in fact you toured the state saying that 98% of our teachers were rated satisfactory, and that was unacceptable. But yet, after millions of dollars expended to out-of-state entrepreneurs to build a Compass system, the results were 96 to 98% effectiveness. Well, the only difference is in terminology, effectiveness versus satisfactory. So it yielded similar results. Again, we're talking about teachers' livelihood, and for the life of me, I can't understand why, as a board, we don't recognize the concerns of our educators. They're wanting to do an effective job. And we're closing the door. I know you said you give lip service well, Superintendent White, and I say that respectfully. You give a lot of lip service saying what you're going to do next month. We don't have time to wait because every day as a superintendent of a school system, I have teachers leaving the system. It's not because support and assistance are lacking. As a superintendent, I'm in my schools and I have a principal here, a minimum of 3 days per week. I have a network team. Mr. Francis Touchette is our leader. He can attest to it. We have teachers leaving, and then we know, bringing up the legacy of Mr. Cecil Pecord, who is deceased. His legacy was teacher quality. He asserted the importance of teacher quality, and yet we're driving away our quality educators. And that
I'd like Superintendent to respond.
I was just wondering, I don't think I certainly disagree with almost everything you just said, but yes. But putting, I think, on the core of what you had said at the outset, I don't disagree. So what is it that you're proposing here?
I am proposing that, first of all, that we appoint a commission to study the validity and reliability of value-added model. In fact, I heard several people say they don't know the formula. Well, I can attest to you, I've seen the formula. I have a doctorate, and I don't know because no one has walked me through it, the process. And I think these educators, most impacted by the value-added model, they don't have a clue because no one took the time to explain to them.
So here's, rather than jumping all around, I'd like to get to, you have a recommendation. I reacted, you had a report that you requested. In front of the board is a motion to receive that. Hold on 1 second. I reacted to that with two things. I said that we're engaging with school boards and with the superintendents and in public forums about a transition policy, and that transition policy is going to come and if you, I know you're anxious to speak, but if you wouldn't mind letting me finish. And that we're going to be bringing that policy, and absolutely that policy should speak to teacher level accountability, and absolutely it should take some of the pressure off of teachers as we make this transition. We've said for months that policy is going to be in front of this board in December. Second, I also said I think an outside review is a good idea, and that was my reaction to that. I said I didn't think we need another layer of bureaucracy, we don't need another committee and task force and all that, but I think an outside review is not a bad idea. So I don't think you've got an unfavorable audience from me on the things that you've suggested. So the ball is in your court in terms of taking it forward.
Okay. And I do want to make one other comment. I did attend the Superintendent Advisory Committee meeting, and you said that the recommendation will be to, we recognize the achievement level will drop, and that we would lower the bar by...
That is not what I said.
Well, I'm paraphrasing, okay?
But you're paraphrasing incorrectly.
In essence, that's what it amounts to, and that we would be assured that no district would drop by more than 1 letter grade, okay? And that's what you said.
I did say
okay,
that.
You did say that. So you're saying in December you'll come back with the proposal?
Well, as I said to Ms. Bofi, we will have that policy likely in advance so that the public can comment on it and so on.
I'm not supporting that because I'm prepared to offer a substitute motion at this meeting. I will ask that we approve the formation of a committee consisting of statisticians and mathematicians to research the validity of the Compass value-added model and to apply a moratorium on accountability and high-stakes testing so that we can give this initiative time to develop. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Okay. I want to make sure we get the motion on the floor, and then is there a second for the motion?
I'll second. Actually, she would be amending her initial motion, and if Ms. Hill accepts it, that will be what's on the floor.
Okay, so it's on the floor. Is there any other board discussion on this amended motion? Okay, can you repeat it one more time? I want us to make sure we get to the decision-making point. Go ahead.
So it recommends that the educator effectiveness recommends to the board to approve the formation of a committee of statisticians and mathematicians to research the reliability and validity of the Compass value-added model and apply a moratorium on accountability and high-stakes testing.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any board discussion on this? Any response to that before we vote on the amended motion? Mr. Romer?
I don't disagree with the third-party analysis of VAM. I don't know that I agree with a committee to do that. I don't know if I agree with the structure. So if Ms. Beebe could give me a little more, explain it one more time what you think the committee would do, because I would rather ask Ms. Cope and the superintendent to come back to us with a recommendation of how to form or how to study this with a third party versus coming up with the structure right now, is to spend more time on what that structure should be and then report that to us.
May I respond, Ms.
Dr. Beebe, yes.
I feel very confident that I will know the response presented by Superintendent White. My recommendation or my motion, substitute motion, is to form a committee of objective individuals, statisticians, mathematicians. I have nominated 3. Dr. Finney is also interested. He has been attempting to study this value-added model. And then it's open to Louisiana statisticians at the different universities, as I've included in the information I submitted to the BESE staff.
Thank you. Mr. Romer?
I think it deserves, I'm not certain I would limit it to Louisiana. I mean, quite frankly, if you want a third-party objective opinion, it might be better served from someone not impacted by our daily business. That's an opinion. I'm not certain that's a fact. So, how we comprise this or who provides us a third-party opinion is a critical decision for us to make. Furthermore, I think your motion went further to say we put a moratorium on all testing in the meantime. Is that not correct?
Well, let me explain the way I envision this. Is I don't have a problem with the test being administered and tracking student progress, but not holding our teachers accountable, our schools accountable, our districts accountable until we build the plane. We're building the plane as we fly it. And if you guys don't see it, I'll quote the gentleman, you have to be Stevie Wonder.
I'd make a couple of points. One, I don't think we can, by law, stop the process. It's a piece of legislation. It was legislatively, we were legislatively told to institute this. And number 2, I still think it goes back. Okay, we do have to follow the law, which says that Act 54, we must do this. Okay, so we can't stop that. Now, we can have a third-party analysis, and what I'm suggesting is we can't just make up how we're going to get that analysis right here. And I would suggest that at the December meeting, working with Ms. Cope and the DOE, we come back with a thorough plan on how we would get a third-party analysis. I'm not objecting to a third-party analysis. I'm just objecting that we make it up as we go right here, like you're saying we're doing with everything else.
Is there any addition? Is there other board discussion? I know Mr. Lee. Yes.
I think everyone would agree with accountability and agree with standards. The Common Core has been approved as a standard, and I think the concern now is with the evaluation and lack of understanding of the curriculum. In some parishes, I think the curriculum was defined well and teachers are fairly comfortable. In some parishes, I think it was not defined as well and teachers are not as comfortable. They are apprehensive about being evaluated based on standards and knowing that the test results are likely to not measure up to what they have in the past. I'm not sure what you mean by a moratorium. I would think maybe a suspension.
That's the same.
Of the test based on the Common Core standards until are based on them until we have an analysis, but now you only mentioned statisticians and mathematicians, but now it also covers English and language arts. And I would think that should be a part of a study also.
Okay. Is there any other board discussion or any other board members putting forth a substitute?
I don't think the motion's in order.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's in violation of state law. So the motion needs to be changed.
What does it violate? I need
We cannot put a
clarification from you.
moratorium.
I'm not
This
saying-
body can't put a moratorium on what the legislature has told us to do.
Well, what's to prevent us from administering the exams?
I'll make a
moving
substitute
forward?
motion. I'll make a motion that Ms. Cope and the BESE office work with DOE and come back to us with a recommendation of how to get a third-party analysis of VAM and bring that in the December meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a second by Mr. Gio. Okay, just a reminder on process, do we do the substitute? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and vote on the substitute now. I think we need a roll call.
Can I make a
Yes,
comment?
go ahead,
before we
Mr.
do?
Lee.
Can we discuss the substitute motion?
Yes, let's discuss the substitute motion.
I would suggest that in that recommendation back to the board, that it include the possibility of using state tests rather than the projected exam that will now be given. At least something that can cause teachers to be a little more comfortable with the evaluation process.
May I make a suggestion, Mr. Lee? We have been, for months, working in a policy-making process on what we've been calling the transition. And I think that's what Mr. Lee is hinting at. And that involves, and many of you have been in some of these meetings, the standards, the tests, which standards, which tests, school-level accountability, letter grades, educator-level accountability, compass, and student-level accountability, promotion and graduation. We have committed for months now that you will begin seeing policy on this transition in December. We've been saying that for months. And I think that I agree with, and you and I have spoken about this issue, Mr. Lee, I agree with Mr. Lee's sense of things, and I agree with Dr. Beebe's sense of things, that while the standards are the standards, and we're moving down that line, removing some of the pressure out of the classroom should be an objective of that transition policy. It is extremely complex, and we're not going to make it sitting up here on this dais. So I believe that from our perspective, I hear what Mr. Romer is saying about an independent report on value added. I also hear what Mr. Lee is saying about needing to accommodate the pressure and take some of the pressure off of the classroom. And if we were to agree with Mr. Romer's motion, we would be happy to work with Ms. Cope on achieving a plan for a third-party review. And you already have our commitment, and you're welcome, of course, to put it in motion if you'd like to, that we are bringing all of the policy considerations that Mr. Lee is getting at in December anyways. So however you want to package those things, if you want to do it in motion or not, I'm on the record saying we are going to do both of those things in December.
That's good enough as far as I'm concerned.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else, any other board discussion about Mr. Romer's motion?
I have a question.
Yes,
Who
Dr.
determines the third-party evaluator?
I think they're going to, what I'm suggesting is they come back to us with a suggested method to do this. And then this board will ultimately determine what method we use. This board will determine that.
So in essence, we're delaying my request. I mean, it could come back to form a committee, is what you're saying.
It could. It could come back and say, form a committee. It could come back and say, this guy's the guy, or this woman's the woman. It could come back and say any number of things. But it's going to give us time to figure out how best to structure it and how best to manage it and what should be the protocol that we're going to follow. And that's going to be, I'm asking for that to be delivered in December.
Well, the vote would be 9-2, so I'm willing to take you up on your offer.
we need order, please. Okay, we're going to go ahead and have a repeat of the motion, of Mr. Romer's motion.
Okay, the Educator Effectiveness Committee recommends that the board receive the report on the formation of a committee of statisticians and mathematicians to research the reliability and validity of the Compass value-added model, and directed the department and BESE staff to come up with a recommendation and report it in December 2013 regarding third-party evaluation of value-added.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any objections to this motion? Are there any objections to this motion?
Hearing none.
Hearing none, the motion carries. Great, next item.
Page 27, item 5.2, consideration of trainings for stakeholders regarding the Compass value-added model formula, including detail on the computation of scores. The recommendation is to receive.
I need a motion. Okay, Dr. Beebe, I need a second. Second by Ms. Bradford. Any discussion on this item? Dr. Beebe?
Okay, I saw, in fact, recently I posted or reposted on a Facebook page the question, what do Coca-Cola and Compass have in common? And the fact is the formula. Nobody knows the formula. So thus the reason for this item added here is that our stakeholders need to be educated to the value-added model formula, and I guess in essence with the formation of a committee, if that does come to fruition, that we would ask for trainings. I mean, you know what, if I'm going to be held accountable to standards, I want to know what those standards are. I want a detailed explanation. I want an understanding of what I'm held accountable to. And this is the missing link in the evaluation process as I see it. So my substitute motion would be is that we would provide trainings to our stakeholders, unless somebody is speaking to this item. But I would like to have trainings offered to all stakeholders to provide a detailed explanation of the value-added model and the sample computations as a means to provide stakeholders with a better understanding of VAM.
Superintendent.
Do you need a second?
Can I have a second just for the, okay.
First of all, I want to commend Dr. Beebe on the intent of this, of what you're suggesting. I think you're right that, as in all change activities, understanding of the people involved is the most critical aspect beyond their personal commitment to it. I wanted just to read so that members of the board can appreciate what actually has happened in terms of training on the model. There's a whole bunch of other trainings, obviously, but just on the model. Okay. 2010, this passes. 2010 and 11, 19 school districts, including 328 schools, participate in a pilot using the model. All have trainings available to them. 60 webinars are held for school leaders and teachers in pilot districts explaining the model on-site trainings as requested. 2012, 44 statewide meetings on Compass and VAM open to all teachers and all principals and all district administrators. August, value-added webinar open to every educator in the state. 2013, January and February, webinars and meetings on Compass adjustments open to every educator in the state. April, teacher leader trainings, Compass trainings. June, Understand Your VAM Score webinar open to every teacher in the state, held multiple days, and on and on. And so I'm not suggesting that's a good reason not to do anything. I think we should do something per your urgings. I just want you to know that when we create trainings, I think the issue isn't so much that we're not creating the trainings. Maybe we need to find a better way to, compel people or create an incentive to be there, because it doesn't appear that if what you're seeing is right, that's happening. And so I might suggest something like, if any superintendent or any principal desires a training, that the department is obligated to provide it on the VAM model. We will be there. I just want to make sure that it's not just us opening the doors. Instead, it's people saying, this is what we want. and we have to respond to it. Would something like that be acceptable?
No, Superintendent White, because I've been a party to some of the, or participant in some of those trainings. What I am talking about is if someone files a grievance, and I had a situation, and in fact, members of your staff responded via a telephone conference call, the questions posed by the individual with concerns with the teacher, they could not answer specifically. What I want is what I'm requesting is an example where all of those external variables that are controlled. I want to see that. I want a step-by-step process so that it would afford me a better understanding, because what I do for one, I do for all. And I need, if I make a decision to waive or what have you, I would want to be able to defend the reason that I'm issuing a waiver or recommending a waiver. And so I want it spelled out. I want to go through the process. Those sessions that you are speaking to, they were just an overview, telling us about the process. Nothing to the extent or the depth of knowledge that I'm seeking.
Okay, there are a couple of public comments on this topic. Dr. Michael Walker-Jones. Lee Barrios is going to be up next after.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Board, for hearing me. Let me suggest that, again, without breaching any confidences, we were engaged, Louisiana Association of Educators were very engaged with a number of our members who struggled with their VAM ratings, came to us as they should in terms of us representing them, and we did our due diligence. Like our sister organization, we don't go out and scream and do the things and stuff that we get accused of a lot. We try to work through the system. I'd like to compliment Superintendent White. He has a wonderful staff in terms of the teacher evaluation section. We have worked very closely with them in trying to help not only the teachers understand, but the administrators understand, and the superintendents to understand how VAM works. There is no secret that the Louisiana Association of Educators has not been a big fan of the value-added method in terms of how we're implementing it. It's not that we're against any data point, and that's one area I think where we are totally in agreement with the superintendent, that having at least a piece of data about a student's growth, and again, I want to emphasize this is not a growth model. Having information on a student's growth is important, but VAM is not a growth model. It is a predictive score model. And as a result of that, one of the things that our teachers are very concerned about is that a predictive score model has virtually no instructional value. There is no item analysis that results from LEAP or iLEAP that tells a teacher, here's the area that you need to concentrate on in terms of strengthening your instruction. Because simply all it says is, here's the score that we predicted for this child, here's where the child went, and they either leaped over the bar or they did not. But teachers are not built that way. Teachers want to know, where did I go wrong? What was the instructional problem that I have? What was was it the curriculum? Was it the methodology? And teachers more than ever, when a student is not successful, we blame ourselves. And there's very little recognition of that in this process. And that's why when you look at what it is that teachers need, they need that understanding. All of us need that understanding. It's a wonderful mathematical formula. I will freely admit, it has some really elegant designs to it. But in terms of helping instruction, it does not. One of the reasons why we have consistently tried to get our legislature, and many of you know this, to look at revamping our entire system with regard to adding more data points. We believe the teachers want more accountability, but we want it in terms of what the total scope of our work is. Professional learning communities. More of our own professional development. More professional development from our systems. More opportunity to learn from one another as we model for one another effective teaching skills. None of that is built into our system. Collaboration. Individual, subjective, you fail, you pass. That's what this system is built around. We have asked the legislature, and they responded last year, to help us to gather data. Again, working inside the system. I am very disappointed at this point that we are not moving quickly in terms of looking at the teacher empowering, leading, and learning survey. Other states have done it. I will quickly sum up with this point. If we want our teachers to have that reduction, and I agree with Superintendent White, we need to reduce the tension, the angst, and the uncertainty that teachers feel in the classroom today. And in order to be able to do that, we must start to listen to them and ask them, what are the resources you need? What are the trainings? And at the end of the day, hold people accountable, but hold us accountable as professionals. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Monahan is next, and then James Finney.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. I've studied Dr. Noel's, tried to study Dr. Noel's value added from his research beginning several years ago up until now. It's impossible for me, certainly, to understand the metric behind value added. And it is a mathematical equation, quite complex one. I would venture to say that nobody sitting up there could explain value added. I wonder if anybody with the Department of Ed, in the Department of Ed, could explain that. I've asked for from the Department of Ed for a sample, plug in the numbers in the equation. Have not been able to get that. That, I think, is what Dr. Beebe wants. That's what teachers want. Anybody that does want to see the metric and to see the research can find it on the Board of Regents website. You might have to look for it a little bit now. It's been moved around. But you've got 5 years of ongoing, years of ongoing study of VAM by Dr. Noel. And it's never been peer reviewed, by the way. And he himself has cited limitations with the system. So I certainly support Ms. Beebe's request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Monahan, President of Louisiana Federation of Teachers, and I won't repeat anything that I've heard spoken, and I can cut to the chase. I do understand a defensive position of that I've heard in regard to the training that it was offered, perhaps, and it comes down to like you can offer the horse some water, but you can't make them drink. The only thing is, I do have a history on the subject, and I do know that the offerings were not complete. I remember, as the superintendent mentioned, that there was I was trying to write the words down. It was in 2010, there was so many opportunities, webinars and such. Even back then, there were complaints. There were touches. They were referred to actually before Senate House and the Joint Committee in 2011 as touches without any definition of what that touch meant. And I think what really is a very simple issue before us, it's not 25 slides and a PowerPoint. It should be able to defend itself in its own formulation, fairly plugged in, fairly shown to a teacher, as this is how we arrive at what we have arrived at. Now, I think part of the problem here, though, and that's for an entire board to consider, is that this isn't the same beast in everyone's mind that we rolled out with in 2009. Well, that's true or not, I'm not actually sure, but I've heard that the formula itself, the inputs have changed, other parts of it has changed. We have even worked to a point in the process where adjustments are being made. Now, adjustments to the science is what I was exposed to, that we were dealing with science, and therefore science is empirical, and that's where it stops. I'll close by saying this because it's in neither of these. Of course, we support Dr. Beebe's motion. Like real clear, instructive to everyone to know how it works for the professionals that are subjected to the evaluation or its findings. But I'll go a little further. There is no, to date now, I don't care how benevolent leadership is on this board, the teacher in the classroom has no right to challenge the state's findings. Still has no right under the due process component of Bulletin 130 to avoid Steve Monahan, to avoid whomever might perform my function, and simply say, I want to challenge these results. Now, in 1991-92, around there was another governor at least set up an administrative law judge process to where teachers who disputed that which the state owned, you own this evaluation system. The local superintendent doesn't. The local school board doesn't. The teacher should have that right to question the results and be provided with a clear understanding of how you've arrived at your findings. There's nothing in the bulletin that allows that. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this. But and I close here. Superintendent, it wasn't on your watch when this happened. When the BESE was released, the great crack in the value added, you weren't the one, but we are all responsible that 3 years later we're still having a discussion whether people have been properly in service to how it's done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
James, next is Rebecca Ellis.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, my concerns are totally independent of any change in the test type. So whether PARC assessments are adopted or when is immaterial to my concern. The value-added model cannot be explained or will not be explained by anybody that works in this building. I believe Ms. Barrios is right, that it would be useful if somebody could plug in hypothetical information about an imaginary student, what their scores were for each of the tests over the last 3 years, and get a predicted score. That capability does not exist. I spoke to Professor Madden after we both testified a few minutes ago, and we agreed, and I'm confident that the other two experts that Dr. Beebe mentioned would probably go along with this. We'd be happy to give you a report in December, and then you can decide to choose whatever outside experts you want. But the fundamental thing is the public has a right to know how this is calculated. The teachers have a right to know. It's time for somebody in this building to start responding appropriately to public records requests and let us know how these numbers are actually calculated. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Ellis and Wendy Demers is next.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Ellis. I'm a parent from St. Tammany Parish, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. Ms. Davis helped me select which item agenda to speak under. It doesn't, you may find that it doesn't exactly relate, but we felt it was the best fit. I wrote this editorial, and I shared it with Superintendent White and also Mr. Garvey back in September after I attended the second MFP task force meeting. It's entitled, How Are Schools Supposed to Get Every Student to Meet the Same Academic Standards and Meet the Individualized Education Programs for Children with Disabilities? Both are required by federal law. I have two sons. One is a third grader who has autism, and this is basically just written from my heart, not meant to point fingers at my son's teacher, principal, school district. They've all been very supportive. Just wanted to give that as a caveat. Dear, is anybody listening? Several weeks ago, I sat down with my son's teacher and listened to her tell me what her priorities are for him for this year. She revealed that she is largely focused on reading comprehension and to a lesser extent, writing. It is indisputable that those are areas of high need for him, but what she had forgotten and said very little about until I mentioned it was language and social interaction. I could see a light bulb go off in her head. Suddenly she understood. Yes, of course, I must work on those too. Then I saw something else. It was something I can only describe as concern, although that's an insufficient descriptor. She started talking about all of the third grade standards. She handed me copies of the standards, which she had already printed out, tucked safely inside page protectors. The teacher began to ponder, how will I address the core deficits of his disability in the midst of teaching all these standards? Oh, well, maybe there'll be a few minutes during group work, or perhaps during a pull-out session, but there's so much to work on academically.
Please start wrapping it up.
We were halfway over the first 9 weeks, and although every member of Jackson's team was working hard, he is so lost. He's lost in a sea of standards and expectations for him to think critically and explain every answer. It takes much more than raising the bar or saying you believe students with disabilities can achieve for them to actually achieve. You see, he has only answered a why question a handful of times in his life. Now he is asked why, how, and explain your answer all day long. What do you think is going to happen when you test and assess him? He is going to fail, and it will look as though he cannot and has not achieved.
Thank you.
I actually didn't finish.
I think our board members, they have a copy of the letter, and I'm sure they're going to read it. I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to speak in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
Hello, my name is Wendy Demers, and I am a middle school teacher in Orleans Parish. I do not teach ELA or math, but I want to speak to the VAM score because the VAM score is something that I did question this year when I received my score. I teach science. I teach 6th and 7th grade students and 8th grade. And the way the scores are calculated, to my understanding, is that this is the score they received this year, this is the expected score for the year which I have them, and if they don't show enough growth, then I am assigned a number. I teach physical science in 6th grade, and in 5th grade the students have general science. So what I'm looking at is impacting their physical science and some inquiry and science and environment. I wrote my student learning target for the science that I can impact. I accomplished a great level of achievement in physical science with my 6th graders. I am a highly effective teacher. I have been teaching for 36 years. I have been teaching middle school for 16 of those. I could line up students to tell you how effective I am in not just teaching science, but in teaching them, because that is my goal. And I was insulted by the score I received on the VAM, and by the comment that was recently placed in the paper that said that I can learn to be a better teacher by observing others. I am a mentor teacher. I am a cooperating teacher for student teachers for 2 universities. I've worked with teacher pre-service programs. I'm on state committees. I've written curriculum. I pride myself on what I do in the classroom. I am very student-focused, and I'm constantly working to improve. Not because somebody said I had to, because I figure one day I'll get this right. I am determined to make sure that I impact student learning. And I feel insulted with the score that I got. And I think it's the calculation of the score because it doesn't truly reflect the impact I've had on student learning. So you can tell me how the score is calculated. I know how it's calculated. But I don't agree with the way it's calculated. And I don't think it's fair. I think it's demoralizing. So I'm hoping that in the committees and discussions and changes that occur, that other factors can be added in, maybe the impact that teacher has in other responsibilities and training and mentoring other teachers, or maybe just a way to say, let's address your strand. I'm not a math teacher, but I think surely someone can figure out how to factor in certain variables. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last speaker on that item. Do we have any other comments or questions from BESE members?
Yes.
Ms. Hill?
Before I like to offer a substitute motion, but before I do that, I have a question because I'm still trying to understand COMPAS. Within the evaluation, maybe Superintendent White or someone from his staff can answer this. Is there a psychosocial or emotional component within the teacher evaluation that we will look at for teachers? Because I know that is it's a huge issue when we're dealing with children with various issues, especially with IEPs and 504 accommodations. So is there a component within the evaluation that focus on that child's social and emotional and psychological component?
Well, I think all teachers, of course, have to address those issues if student learning is going to happen in the classroom. I know we all know that. The measurement is observed practice in the classroom and is a measurement of students' performance, so academically. So I think any good teacher is taking those things into consideration. I know most of our teachers take those things deeply into consideration. It's not explicit in the evaluation system, though.
Okay, so for example, I'm just trying to get some clarity here. So with the 50% of the student performance is just strictly based on testing, on the outcome of the test?
50% of the score.
Correct.
And then what the rating ultimately is depends on what that score is.
Okay, because I think we need to look at it. I think we need to be very critical in this issue, because we have to understand that these kids are taking one test within a year. And from a social worker perspective, that child may come in the classroom in the day of that test and may have had a crisis or may have had numerous issues throughout the school year. And I don't want the student or the teacher to be held accountable for issues that may have not been addressed. So there's a way that we can look at this formula and maybe put a percentage of that within the student outcome. I'm asking that question because that's very critical for me.
Well, a couple things. Number one, in the formula, in the statistical formula you're referring to, there are issues like attendance, issues like behavioral challenges that are manifestations of socio-emotional issues. Those are in the formula already. But second, I think, and Dr. Beebe raised this. I keep calling you Ms. Beebe. Dr. Beebe raised this question, and I agreed with her. I do think that we need policy to kind of take some of the pressure off the classroom, and to the degree that that pressure is being caused right now by the transition and the value-added formula coinciding, I think we should create that policy. So I think I'm not sure if we can tweak the formula exactly in the ways that you're describing, but I do think that creating a situation where teachers don't have all that pressure on them by way of the formula, I think would be a good idea, and you'll be seeing policy on that in December.
Okay.
That is encouraging.
I'd like to offer a substitute motion.
So we have a substitute motion on the floor already, and Robert's rules say you cannot handle two substitute motions at one time.
Okay, so what is the substitute motion?
We are going to ask Ms. Beebe to, if she could, repeat her substitute motion.
Well, that we conduct trainings and offer them to all stakeholders and to provide a detailed explanation of the value-added model formula, and accompanying that explanation that there would be examples, sample computations, because as the previous speaker stated, that you have to we want to have concrete examples of figures in which to calculate so that we can see. We need an in-depth understanding of how the formula is applied to produce those outcomes.
Do we have a second on that motion, on that substitute motion? Ms. Hill seconded that. Do we have any questions from BESE members on that motion?
May I just add, just because I might spend some of my life doing these sort of achieving this vision you have, Dr. Beebe, is it that you're asking the department to commit to doing trainings on the model?
Yes. Mr. Chair, are you finished?
I am, yeah.
Ms. Bradford?
Have we not done this already? Do we not have these examples already?
Well, I read through a list of them before, and I'm not trying to disagree with Dr. Beebe in terms of what she's saying. She said that she didn't think those trainings were helpful, because, so here's a suggestion. Why don't we do this? We're going to have a suggestion per Mr. Romer's motion of a third-party review. I would imagine that in that third-party review that Ms. Cope and I come up with, there will be a detailed explanation, because I would imagine whatever Ms. Cope and I come up with will be done by an expert. And that expert will likely do what Dr. Beebe is suggesting, meaning that will unpack the model. So perhaps we could do a trainings based on the results of the third-party review. So contingent on the board approving the third-party review, trainings will be done based on the results of the third-party review. Would that be acceptable?
That's acceptable. And remember, I'll be back in December.
Absolutely.
Ms. Beebe, does that remove the need for the substitute motion?
Oh, yes. I'll send it.
She offered it.
I'll remove it, yes.
Okay, we can go back, I think, then to the original motion, which was to receive?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Directing.
And do we have a second for that?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any questions about that motion? Do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
On page 28, item 5.3, consideration of a discussion regarding the authority of the State Superintendent of Education to waive value-added model scores from Compass evaluation ratings. The recommendation is to receive.
Okay, is there a motion? Okay, motion by Dr. Beebe, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Hill. Discussion on this item, Dr. Beebe?
Yeah, thank you. Let me say that, again, I love teachers, and I don't like pitting one group against the other. But as it relates, the reason I placed this on the agenda was to ask Superintendent White for an explanation as to who authorized him to waive a select group of teachers. As I understand, there were approximately 50 teachers identified, and it was reported in a local news article that you waived those teacher scores. So I need to know when and if indeed BESE approved or granted you authority to issue a waiver.
Superintendent.
I don't think your information is quite accurate, and I appreciate you raising this. Why don't we take a step back to the law? The law basically requires that the department have furnish value-added data where it's available, and that the board create a formula by which those value-added data then factor into the rating. The law also requires that the department conduct an invalidation process, such that if there are things that are wrong with the data, that the department can ferret those out and declare the data null and void. We operated a process over 6 months between probably March and July, whereby individual educators or administrators or superintendents would make information available to us to invalidate information. And thus we were getting a lot of records in. And over the course of that period, about 225 teachers had their data either held for further study or invalidated. An example, a teacher teaches one half of the year in one school, another half of the year in another school. We didn't know about it. A teacher is out for 59 days, so they don't quite meet the 60-day threshold, but it was a serious illness. Well, it makes sense to give a little leeway on that. These kinds of requests came in. Of the 225, 62 were teachers that I determined the data needed to be held for further study. And the reason is that as I looked at a couple of the records that were raised to me, I had some concerns that teachers whose kids were, the majority of whom were finishing at the highest levels, had a greater likelihood of experiencing a high fall. Not that they couldn't make progress, the statistics show that they can. It's that they have, and it's not a progress model, but that they have a high likelihood of falling. I asked the department staff to study that. And so between July and September, early October, we studied that. The conclusion was that there actually is no such bias, that just as many teachers in the middle and in the low ends see kids that experience a significant fall, And as a result, we said that those data were fine. We then sent the data to the superintendents in question for those 62 teachers. They have the data are there. It admittedly was after the rating process when that study was completed, so they were not factored into the ratings. But the data were not waived. The superintendents have the data, and they were studied. Now, out of 17,000 teachers, the 225 that we're talking about are only 1.3%. And the 62 teachers that we're talking about are only roughly 0.25%. You're talking about very, very small numbers out of that 17,000. But in the 225, most of them, yes, we felt like they should be invalidated. In the 62 cases, we studied them. We felt like there was no reason to invalidate them, sent it right back to the district.
Thank you. Okay, we do have public comment on this item. Dr. Michael Walker-Jones, and I'm going to ask that you limit your comments to 2 minutes, given that you've spoken multiple times. And just try. Work with me here. Try.
I'll try.
Thank you.
I'll work with you. But multiple times on different issues does not mean. Okay. But I'll try. First off, let me say that it's important to recognize that in terms of working with the DOE staff, and I know the questions don't come from this way to you guys, but we do have a concern, and I think it's brought up by Dr. Beebe's concern about anyone having the authority to invalidate scores. My understanding is that the superintendents and the principals, once they review those scores, they have that authority to invalidate scores at the local level.
That is not correct.
Okay. Because that was our understanding, that they do not have that. So I would obviously then be concerned if the superintendent took it upon himself then to override then what is at the local level, except in one instance, which goes to what one of the previous speakers said. This particular data is actually controlled by the Department of Education. The superintendents and the principals have no clue as to whether or not the data actually is valid or not, whether the formula and the information that goes into the predicted score of the student was accurate or not. And so the only people who then can be actually a party to the agreement of a teacher is the department. So with that, again, I think what this shows is another level of instability of the process and of the formula itself.
Let me just understand this for a second. In the law, it says that the department shall have a process, the law, not the department's, not the BESE's regulations, yes, the law, for invalidation of data. Over a 4 to 6 month process, the department ran through any time a superintendent or a principal or a teacher would raise an issue along the lines that I described. Illness days, you didn't see that I transferred schools, all of those things. We worked through each of those cases. In a certain set of those cases, we thought that the data merited further study. We studied it. This is a tiny number, 1/4%. It determined that actually the concerns that we had were not valid, and so we sent the data right out to the districts as we normally should. I don't disagree with the third-party suggestion that Dr. Beebe had, and then Mr. Romer made a motion toward at all. I think the third-party review idea is a good one. But what is it about that I just described that is out of bounds somehow with what was intended in the law?
Mr. Superintendent, with all due respect, as a teacher advocate for at least 20 years of my life, as an educator in higher ed and at K-12 level and in high school, I can tell you the problem is transparency. The idea that you or anyone on your staff can look at data that will impact my life and my teaching job without me having any idea as to what it is you're doing or how you're going about that is, I think, very problematic for me as a teacher.
Well, that's good because that didn't happen. So let me tell you what. Let me tell you
but that doesn't fit with what you just described.
Let me tell you what did happen. What happened is we are charged by the legislature with producing the data. Now, you may take issue with that, and that's fine, but that is in the law. That is what we are asked to do. The department is told to produce this data. We produce it. In the law, it says there's an invalidation process. Most often that's initiated by a teacher. If not, then by a principal or by a superintendent.
Yes.
So everyone is aware when that invalidation request is made that we are going to be looking, because we're working with individual teachers at that point. Now, as part of our producing the data process, we said, let's hold a small number of records for further study. We did that as part of the process across 17,000 records. The concerns we had proved to be meritless, and we sent the data to the districts. So we're doing what the legislature intends, which is to say the department should produce it. Now, if your suggestion is to the legislature someone else should produce it, that's a different issue. We're also doing what the legislature intends, which is to say conduct an invalidation process. We did that working with educators who are fully aware because they initiated it. So I'm not trying to argue with you. I just don't understand what it is you're disputing.
I will go back to the point again. You did that behind the scenes, not in front of the teacher. Yes, because I'm aware of 2 of the instances where these issues were brought forth. And in both instances, when the teacher brought forth the issue that this is invalid, there is something wrong here, there was a process, yes, at the department, but was not transparent to the teacher. And yes, there was results, and they said, "Oh, we don't believe that the results are that your concern is meritorious." So the superintendent now has the decision to make, but the decision was in a box. Because now the superintendent is being told you can't change that.
I understand. Okay.
Okay. So do you understand now our concern?
I don't agree with it, but I understand what your suggestions are, which is.
But part of that could be because of the idea that the department is not advocating or trying to sit there and reconcile this person potentially losing their job.
And I would take issue with the many hours that we spent walking individual educators through the situation to try to get to a right answer.
We were party to that.
I know you were, and
I appreciate
you were a
that.
good advisor. So thank you. I now understand what you're saying.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you
another
very
minute
much.
to wrap up.
Albeit,
I
I
understand.
do enjoy a spirited debate with the superintendent. I didn't get to make my other points.
I understand. Go
Okay. First off, the issue of the authority is one of the things that I think this board really has to take a look at. Because the teacher's concerns are, number one, if there is no instructional value, and that is in many instances part of the issue that the teachers are trying to resolve, is, okay, help me then. If this data says that I'm ineffective, show me the areas where I'm ineffective. But the ineffectiveness, again, folks, please realize, the ineffectiveness is that the student did not meet his or her predicted score. Not that, and again, this particular issue, especially as the superintendent outlined it, if a student is a high achiever, and the high achiever did not get to the 99.9 percentile, but only got to the 99th percentile, then that student then did not hit that growth mark, and therefore the teacher then is going to be viewed as ineffective, not because the student didn't learn, but only because the VAM score itself is built on a composite of predictability. Therein is where we have the concern.
Thank you.
And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Lee Barrios, then Steve Monahan.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. I mean, I don't even know how really to address this because the argument is so unreal here. I taught 7th grade gifted students, and from years ago when I saw the disparity between their ILEAP tests and their ACT scores, which they took through Duke University in 7th grade and scored extremely highly, and yet their ILEAP scores were certainly not anywhere near all advanced. I thought, it's got to be the test. It's not me. The students do well, extremely well on the ACT, not necessarily on the ILEAP. But the idea, I mean, we all know where the idea that 50 teachers got special dispensation came from, the CBOS solution thing. And the idea that every single teacher in this state understood that all they had to do was make a complaint and that it would go to the department and it would be looked into is ludicrous. And we're not talking about because they missed 6 months of teaching. We're talking about, for instance, teachers of gifted. We're talking about teachers that just cannot comprehend why their score came out like it did. And that's going to happen even more year after year when they see the disparity between one year and the next. So it's a huge problem, and it's based on the fact that teachers do not know how their scores and are not given their score computation. Thank you.
Thank you. James Finney is going to be next after Steve Monahan.
Steve Monahan, Louisiana Federation of Teachers, and I don't think I'll have to raise my voice right now. I don't want to make this about human beings or it being about the superintendent. or being about particular teachers. The question is the adjustment or the waiver of scores. And I think we could really be very, very simple about this. It's not that complicated. I agree with the superintendent when the superintendent says the law was passed. The laws were passed that created the need for this board to create rules. The rules that we're talking about, number 4 of them. There are 4 specific rules that come under extenuating circumstances. The reason, as president of the Louisiana Federation of Teachers, I remember it so well is because we attempted, working with a board member, to have 5 rules. And this board chose not to adopt the 5th rule. Those are the extenuating circumstances. It isn't about benevolence or someone or hardworking staff to say that we're going to look at the rule, for instance, that says for a leave of so many days, that perhaps we'll be more generous in this case and make it's close enough. There isn't a benevolence factor to this. This isn't about kindness or about the attempt of a benevolent leadership to do the right thing for teachers that the problem that is brought to the attention of administration. 4 rules, and that's what we know to be extenuating. Close the argument this way, because I know you're getting ready to say close. But this is the question at hand for fairness and for full discovery is what are the rules and who can initiate the complaint? Your rules do not empower educators, teachers who have the problem to directly approach the power. That is through the superintendent. So I believe, I'm not putting the fair, and this is close, I promise you, but this is important stuff. It's been a long time. You can fix the policy and make it clear how remedy is found, and not have the feeling that adjustments are made at the building level, because I've heard those things like Dr. Walker also, that for some people and not others, the credibility of the evaluation system is at risk. Straighten it out, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Patricia Ray? Yeah.
If the model is valid, there should be no need to even consider a solution named after any of the members of the legislature. If there are unintended consequences, it suggests that the model should be corrected. Clarity and transparency are key, and the sooner the better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And Rebecca Ellis.
And Madam Chairman, I am going to be as brief as I possibly can, but this is very important for this board to understand that what we've been referencing the law, what the law actually says. This agenda item is meant to address a very specific question, and that it really boils down to whether or not current law and regulation provide for a way to alter individual teacher scores. And the answer to that question is no, that current law does not provide for a way for individual teacher ratings to be altered by the superintendent or anybody at the local level. It does clarify, as the superintendent has mentioned, to clarify, it does say that he can invalidate the VAM portion of a teacher's score for certain extenuating circumstances. In that case, the value-added portion of that teacher's score is then supposed to be replaced with the SLT portion of that teacher's score, and that's in Bulletin 130. But I want to talk to you about the more important, larger picture here, and I promise I'm going to be as brief as I can. But you all really need to understand what the proper path is for the legislature to delegate the authority to you to make a rule that then empowers the superintendent to act. So I want you to understand that the Louisiana Constitution delegates power to BESE to promulgate rules, to carry out its duties and powers, and those rules have to be promulgated in compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act. That authority is vested in BESE through Article 2 of the Louisiana Constitution and Title 17, Section 7 of the Louisiana Revised Statutes, referring to the illegality of the executive branch of government exercising those powers that belong to the legislative branch of the government. The Louisiana Constitution says, quote, "Except as otherwise provided by this Constitution, no one of these branches, nor any person holding an office in one of them, shall exercise power belonging to one of the others." This very clearly explains that the power of BESE is limited to the powers delegated to it by the legislature, and that the power of the superintendent are limited by the scope of those powers delegated to him. And I'm going to skip some of this. It actually is best to understand the relationship between the legislature, BESE, and the superintendent as one inherently defined by powers and duties. So BESE, the legislature charges the superintendent with certain duties in the law, and it gives you the power to make rules so that he can carry out that duty. And this is the most important thing that I'm going to say. In the context of teacher evaluations, the legislature has indeed delegated the power to BESE to, quote, and this is from Act 54, this is your job in Act 54, which created Compass, quote, develop, adopt, and promulgate in accordance with the Administrative Procedures Act all rules necessary for the implementation of Compass.
Thank you.
I'm not done. I'm sorry. This is really, y'all really need to understand, because this is a serious
I need you to
constitutional
start wrapping
problem.
up.
They did so in Title 17, Section 3883, Act 54 of 2010. Act 54 sets out the directive to BESE, which also says that BESE shall set standards to use in determining whether the teacher has successfully met the evaluation qualification. Once BESE sets those standards, and only then, it creates a duty in the superintendent to carry out his office in a way that enforces those standards. Nothing in any rules that you have promulgated allows for the individual altering of a score, only the invalidation of the value-added portion of a teacher's evaluation. Nothing. You have received PowerPoint presentations that talk about the idea of doing it. You have never promulgated a rule that gives the authority to anybody to invalidate or to alter a specific score. And to be completely clear, no changes to Bulletin 130 or any other regulation or rules have been approved by this board. And in Bulletin 130, it starts out with a very clear statement. It says, quote, in passing Act 54, it was the intent of the legislature to establish within each local education authority a uniform and systematic evaluation of certified and other professional personnel. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that is systematic and uniform about changing individual scores after they've been calculated. There's nothing legal about doing it without the authority to do so. And in fact, it would be completely psychotic policymaking to alter Bulletin 130 to give the authority to do it, because it would state in one section of Bulletin 130 that it needs to be uniform and systematic, and in another that it's not going to be because we're going to alter individual teacher scores.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the future, I would really like the respect of this body when I testify to allow me to finish what is actually a very important thought. I rarely go over the time limit, and I want you to know as I leave the table that what I read to you today is just me reading the law. It is not about who is the superintendent or who is not the superintendent. And I think it's very important that you all understand that these provisions of law exist for a reason. It's not
We
hard to follow
appreciate
them.
it,
All
and
you have to do is promulgate the rules.
We appreciate it.
You
Thank
are
you.
empowered to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Ellis.
Hi, Rebecca Ellis. I wanted to respectfully request that I be able to finish my 2 paragraphs. I have a parent and I've waited all day.
I think you can go ahead and begin.
So let me tell you what Jackson has done. He had been permitted to isolate himself from all the children on the playground for the past 2 school years. We were less than 1 week into the school year, and he was no longer standing next to the wall far away from his peers. He was under a tree next to the playground. Fast forward a few more weeks, and he has played on the equipment a few times. But more spectacularly, he is engaging and playing a game of ICU with a little girl in his class. She enjoys him, she likes him, and he likes her, and they play together for a few minutes every day. No standardized assessment he will take this year or any year will reflect that progress. No teacher or related service provider will ever be rewarded for their role in facilitating this achievement. After all, it's not one of the standards. It's not on the test. As an advocate, some days are very challenging when working and living in the disability world. There are no breaks. There is no escape. I sit in rooms with educational leaders who make statements about the 43% of disabilities who passed the test last year. And then I come home to the sweetest little boy who falls in the 57%. A boy who has an amazing ability to tolerate the world around him, but who no longer wants to go to school. How will it get any better? When will it get any better? It only seems like we're heading in the opposite direction of improving outcomes for kids like Jackson. Thank you.
Wanda Riles and Wanda Riles.
Excuse me, Ms. Jones. I just want to make a statement.
Yes.
It was very touching to hear the young lady testimony, and for me, Superintendent White, that's why I've been stressing throughout this process, we need to have a psychological, social, and emotional component when we look at BAM. We have to. And so I'm charging you to make sure in December, and I would like to be a part of that because I am a social worker. And there are many parents like that young lady that have, or teachers that have to actually interact with students that may have had challenges throughout the years. So I just ask you that in December that we look at that and bring something to the board to have some safeguards for those type of children.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wanda Riles, and I've never done this before. Mr. White, you said that you looked at each individual case with the respect to what teachers did and tried to find the loopholes. My first question is, why are we buying Teach for America people when we have people graduating from college right here in our own state? Why are we doing that? Why are we buying teachers when we have them here and we have no recourse? And I'm sorry, but you're asking us to trust you. You're asking us to trust you. That's all.
Thank you. The original motion was to receive. We have a second. Is there any opposition to the motion? Having none, the motion carries. The next item.
On page 29, item 6.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel to reflect new practice exams required for Louisiana licensure. The recommendation is to approve.
So moved. Okay, there's a motion by Ms. Bofi, there's a second by Dr. Moranti. Is there any discussion on this item?
Members, this is the praxis test that is taken for graduates of education programs to become eligible to be in the classroom. Those tests change, just like any test changes. They change fairly regularly. They recommend when the tests are rescaled, the ETS does, which is the company that produces the tests. They recommend a recommended cut score. We are recommending here that the ETS recommended cut score for passage of these tests be the Louisiana test. In the past, we followed this practice of adopting ETS as recommended score. We are suggesting the same here. This is not a deviation from policy. It's just simply that the tests are changing, and thus, in our bulletins, the language will need to change. I can tell you that on a personal level, believe that our country is got to move beyond a test and a bunch of credits as the way that one qualifies to be an educator. I believe we should be looking more at classroom practice, for example, and allowing people to be educators and in looking at their performance ongoing. Nevertheless, for the time being, this is the system that we have. It's changing, and in order to get people certified, which they deserve, we need to move forward on this regulation. I'm asking for your support of it.
Questions? Mr. Lee.
A couple of questions. First, I don't see anything that indicates how the recommendation compares to what is accepted in other states. And I just wonder, how do these scores compare to what other states are doing?
The vast other states obviously are, as Mr. Lee alludes to, are walking through the same process because they too use the praxis. And most other states, the vast majority of states, are adopting the ETS recommended cut scores right off the bat.
Okay, so it's new for everybody.
Yes, sir.
Second question, do we assume that these same practice scores are required for charter school teachers?
They are not required for teachers in charter schools. That's not to say that they're not pursued. The vast majority of teachers in charter schools are certified, but under the law, they're not required.
Thank you. Any other board members have questions?
I just wanted to note this is for notice of intent, wasn't included in the motion.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Are there any objections to this motion? Having none, the motion carries. This concludes our committee meeting. The next committee meeting